Good morning, everybody. To those of you who have joined us, we'll be due to start the webinar in a couple of minutes' time. So we're just waiting for everybody to get online, and then we'll be starting very shortly. Thank you. I can see there are a number of people still joining us, so we'll make a start in a couple of minutes or so. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. We will, I think, make a start. So good morning to you all, and hello, and thank you for joining the third of the CLA's Wednesday webinar series. I hope you can all hear me. I believe we have up to about 160 participants today, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all. My name is Mark Riches, and I'm the Regional Director for the CLA in the Midlands region, and I have the honour of being the chair for today's event. Just before we start, I'd like to remind you all that today's session is being recorded for future use and will be available to other members. So you can see the programme for today's webinars, and I would like to extend a particular thanks to our partners. They are Stratton Parker, Irwin Mitchell and Barclays Bank, from all of whom you shall be hearing today, and to whom I extend my thanks for their help and support with this webinar series. And one of the biggest assets, but also the biggest cost to any business, is that of staff. Good employees are essential to a smooth running and ultimate success of any business. The coronavirus crisis has left a lot of businesses facing issues of reduced workload, and as a result, they're having to look very carefully at their staffing requirements. As you'll all know, the last thing any business wants to do is to lay off good staff, and the last thing the government wants certainly is a huge spike in unemployment. So today's speakers, they're going to guide you through some of the employment issues and questions that many businesses are facing and asking. By the end, they will hopefully leave you informed and with a better understanding of what you can do to protect and ensure the future of your own business and the future and security for your employees as well. The format for today's session will be as follows. I would ask you that you please keep your microphones and videos muted throughout the webinar. Each speaker will give their presentation first, but please do feel free to ask any questions using the questions button, which you should see at the bottom of your screen. Please type your questions in there, and we will try and answer as many of those questions as we possibly can at the end of the session. I would ask that you please restrict your questions to subject matter that we are talking about during this session. And if you have any other queries, please do speak to your regional CLA office as you would do in the normal, in the usual manner, and we will do our best to answer those questions for you. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Roberta, who will be giving us the first update from some of the work that the CLA have been doing and some of the questions that were being asked at the CLA.
Good morning. I'm Roberta Sakaloff and I'm a solicitor and I'm one of the legal team. Legal advice is included in CLA membership and our lawyers advise on a wide range of issues, including property rights, residential and agricultural tenancies and public rights of way, and I advise on employment. I'm going to give you a brief overview of some of the employment issues of the furlough scheme. It's a government scheme for employers to place their eligible PAYE employees on temporary leave that's now known as furlough for at least 21 days until the 30th of June. It's been extended. Employers can claim 80% of the employee's regular pay, up to £2,500 from HMRC, and they can also claim on top of that the national insurance contributions on the 80% and the minimum pension contributions. But discretionary payments are not included, nor are any benefits in kind. The portal opened on the 20th of April. I have to say that it is possible for employers to carry on paying employees normal pay or to top up the employees' pay and to bear the cost of the 20%. Here are some links for the mechanics of the scheme. You can check if you can claim your employees' wages. The HMRC's website also has a very good page and a calculator on how to work out the 80% of the wages that you can claim. And there's also a step-by-step guide for employers in order to claim. The scheme is administered and it's run by the Revenue, but the legal underpinning is actually the Treasury Direction of the 15th of April 2020, and that's under the Coronavirus Act. The two aren't entirely consistent, unfortunately, and I'm sure that those discrepancies will be ironed out at some point in the future. What is a furloughed employee for the purposes of the scheme? Well, it was somebody who was on the payroll and had been paid as of the 19th of March. Somebody who's been instructed and agreed to stop work for at least 3 weeks by reason of circumstances arising out of coronavirus or coronavirus disease. Now you can see that that is a very wide definition. You don't need an underlying redundancy situation in order to be able to furlough an employee. What you do need is circumstances arising out of coronavirus. That is why you can furlough an employee who, for example, has to stay at home and look after the children while the schools are closed. The other thing, of course, is that an employee who is on temporary leave can't work for the employer. Now, employment law applies to this at all stages of the process, even if you're topping up from the 80% to the 100%. If you're not furloughing all your staff, then you're going to have to think about who you furlough. And if you're rotating your furloughed staff, you're going to have to think about how you work out the rota for the purposes of looking to make sure that you do it in an objective way. The reason is that equality and anti-discrimination issues can arise. So I would suggest that everybody keeps a record of their objective criteria in order to avoid some allegation, perhaps, that all the male employees were furloughed at 100% and both pregnant women were doing all the work in the meantime. Now, putting somebody on furlough is actually a variation of the employment contract. It can be a problem if you seek to vary a contract without any consent, because imposing a variation that's detrimental to an employee can give rise to some very strange and very awful claims like unlawful deduction from wages, contract, or even if the employee's got more than 2 years continuous employment, unfair dismissal. Now, I have to say, the rest of these are very, very slight at the moment. The reason is that if you're furloughing somebody on 100% of their pay, they're not going to cause a problem. And even if you're furloughing somebody at 80% of their pay, then if the alternative is redundancy, the chances are they are going to agree to this. But in order to agree a variation, you need to consult with your employee to obtain their consent. I would suggest that you keep a record of your consultation, and then you will be able to show that you have got consent. This leads me very nicely on to paperwork that's required under the scheme. Now, the Treasury direction of the 15th of April says that you need the written agreement of the employer and of the employee that the employee will stop work, and that this can be by email. However, the revenue guidance that postdates the Treasury direction, and that's dated the 20th of April, says, and I'll quote this, "To be eligible for the grant, employers must confirm in writing to their employee, confirming that they've been furloughed. If this is done in a way that is consistent with employment law, that consent is valid for the purposes of claiming. There needs to be a written record, but the employee does not have to provide a written response." The differences are obvious. Now, it happens that we at the CLA have provided a furlough agreement. It's on our website along with accompanying notes. For people who just furloughed their employees perhaps back in March, when the HMRC guidance was slightly different and only required written notification, then we think that you're going to be all right, because the portal requires a declaration of compliance with the guidance and not with the Treasury direction. You've got to keep your paperwork for 5 years, and if you do think that you've got a problem perhaps with whether you're complying, then do check it and make sure. If you've got any questions or any queries, please do get in touch. What can employees do while they're on furlough? Well, what they can't do is work for the employer or for any connected or linked employer, and this includes not providing services or generating any income. What can employees do then? Well, they can take a second job with someone else. The CLA lobbied on this because we need people to pick the fruit and to help out with the harvest, and it would enable employees who are on furlough to pick for Britain or to join the Land Army. The other thing that employees can do while they're on furlough is volunteer. They can also do some training, but there's a point here that if your employee is on the national minimum wage, then you will have to top up that national minimum wage if you're only paying 80% to 100%, because employees are entitled to be paid for the time that they spend training. Finally, employees can take annual leave while they're on furlough, and employers can claim 80% of the grant, but they will have to top it up to top up their pay to normal pay. And on that note, I'm going to hand you over to Matthew, who will include a presentation, in his presentation, information on annual leave. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you for listening.
Well, hi, good morning, everyone. And it's very good to be here. My name is Matthew Irvine. I'm an employment lawyer at Irwin Mitchell. And I am first going to say that I'm sorry not to have the customary sort of legal bookcase in the background to add that gravitas and authority to my words. But following on from what Roberta has been talking about, I'm going to be looking at some of the issues arising from the job retention scheme, in particular in relation to holiday, sick, maternity pay, coming on to selection as to who to furlough. I'm then going to move on to talk about how you might choose to reduce employees' hours or their pay, and that might be now or as we come to the end of the furlough scheme. And then on a slightly more upbeat note, I'll be considering how we can support our employees during these unprecedented and challenging times. So, as Roberta's mentioned, we've now had guidance from HMRC, and the latest was on the 23rd of April. And it is now clear that an employee can take holiday, or it might be an unusual request, during furlough, and the pay has to be topped up to their usual holiday pay. It's also now clear that annual leave does continue to accrue during furlough, and the question arose as to whether employees were going to be able to carry over any of their holiday pay, any of their holiday, and the government has confirmed that if it's not reasonably practicable for a worker to take all their holiday due to coronavirus, then they can carry it over for up to 2 years. So that would be until the end of December 2022. Remember that it's still possible as an employer to refuse a request for annual leave, probably unlikely in the current situation. More likely maybe that you want to actually require your employee to take holiday because you're worried that they may have too much left at the end of the year. And you can still do that by giving the requisite notice. That may not be so much of an issue now that they can also carry it over into the subsequent years. Finally, just to mention that bank holidays, if employees normally do take those, then their pay needs to be topped up again for bank holidays. Moving on now to the position with sick leave and employees that are self-isolating. The starting point is that they are entitled to statutory sick pay, but the question might arise as to whether an employer can choose to furlough an employee who's off sick. And also, if they are able to do that, what pay will they then receive? And the answer is that an employer can furlough someone who's currently off sick, provided it is for business reasons. And what would then happen would be the employee would receive furlough pay and not statutory sick pay, so they wouldn't double recover. If, on the other hand, an employee becomes sick while they're on furlough, the employee can, well, it's actually up to the employer to decide whether to move their employee onto SSP or to keep them on furlough. Practically speaking, it's probably easier to keep them on furlough, and I can also imagine that in many ways it's better for the employee to stay on the furlough pay. Shielding employees, now that's the clinically extremely vulnerable to COVID employees under the government's guidance, can also be furloughed. wanted to mention maternity leave or those on similar parental leave. The normal rules still apply. They can continue to be paid statutory maternity pay. But interestingly, the government guidance, the HMRC guidance does say that an employer can claim for enhanced contractual maternity pay through the scheme. So that does seem to suggest that it's possible to put employees who are currently on maternity or other family leave on furlough. Now, if you're furloughing everyone, then selecting who to furlough isn't an issue. But and Roberta touched on this. It is important to remember that if you do need to select some and furlough, retain others, then discrimination laws and equality laws continue to apply. So you do need to think about how you make those selections. An employee could argue potentially that it was discriminatory to either select them for furlough, or to be honest, they might say, oh, I'd rather have been retained. Please retain me and don't put me on furlough. Either way, to avoid that type of allegation, it's worth thinking about what your business rationale is for who you're selecting. And ideally, you would adopt the same sort of objective criteria that you might use if you were doing a redundancy process. Roberta's mentioned this, that there's been clarification now that whilst it's good to write to your employee to confirm they're being furloughed, you don't actually need to get the written response back from them. It's obviously good if you can, but you should be fine without it. The furlough scheme is currently due to come to an end on the 30th of June this year. And it may be that you're then looking at whether you can bring employees back potentially on reduced hours or pay. It may be that even now you've got people that you want to work, but you don't want to pay them the full amount, or you want to reduce their hours. So how do you go about doing that? And the starting point, of course, is the contract of employment. Check to see if you've got any clause in there which allows you to put people on short hours. To be honest, it may well not be there, and often it's not there. And in that situation, you're again looking to see whether you can vary the contract by agreement with your employees. The employee, of course, is sort of not likely to be that keen to reduce their hours or indeed their pay. And that is where you kind of need to point out the reasoning as to why they should agree with that. You're basically saying that the other options are a little bit more drastic. They may well include potentially looking at redundancy, or another option is to potentially dismiss for a sound business reason and then re-engage on reduced pay. Either way, you're kind of saying, look, they really should agree to this reduction in pay. Just to say that if there's likely to be less work available, then that's potentially a redundancy situation. And although the job retention scheme clearly is designed to avoid redundancies, employers are still able to do that, of course, subject to following the normal rules on the redundancy process. And it may be that you think we've got enough work, but actually we can't afford to pay the same rates as we did pre-coronavirus. And in that situation, that's more of a dismissal for a sound business reason, where you then offer the chance to be re-engaged on that reduced pay. To try and end on a slightly more upbeat, sorry, I've gone backwards. An upbeat note, I think this is an opportunity to certainly demonstrate to your employees how much you value them and that you want to work together to overcome this sort of unprecedented challenge. I think it's likely staff will remember how they're treated during this period. So I've put together some bullet points there, which may well be common sense, but I think they're worth considering. First, I would aim as far as possible to be open, honest and frank with your staff. Keep good levels of communication, which includes listening as well as passing on updates to them. Second, keep an eye out for their well-being. It's very possible that staff are feeling isolated or anxious, especially those who are maybe now working from home. And unfortunately, this may lead to increased feelings of stress and their impacts, and the impact may well be on their mental health. So do bear that in mind. And the third there is just to offer encouragement and support to your employees to keep going, to persevere, and to stay positive in this climate. There are clearly potential difficult decisions ahead, but it's worth remembering that your staff are often your greatest asset. Thank you for listening. I'm now going to hand over to Carl McConville, who is from Barclays.
Thank you, Matthew. So your last slide very much encompassed where I was going to start. I think we have to remember that getting good staff takes a long time, and building a good, strong team likewise. And our staff are our most important asset for many, many businesses. So I think, caring, well-being, being open and honest, absolutely we would encourage that. In this time when some of your office staff will be working from home, checking in regularly, making sure that they really are okay is absolutely vital at this time. I think we talked a lot about furlough, we talked a lot about shortened hours and such like, but actually for many rural businesses, we will need people in our businesses. We maybe need them on slightly less hours, but we need to keep the business running, and we need to keep it effective. And for that, at a time when we've got reduced income for many businesses, especially those that are heavily diversified, there are schemes available. And we talked last week about the CBILS scheme, the Coronavirus Business Interruption Lending Scheme. There's a new scheme announced yesterday that we'll be hearing more about over the forthcoming week. But I'd encourage customers of banks to talk to their bank about why they may need some support to, one, support their staff in this difficult time. So it might be providing extra facilities and different ways of working. You may need to buy some laptops, you may need to buy some different IT equipment. So talk to your banks about that. It may be the fact that you need to keep the place up together and keep the work going. Again, talk to your banks about that. You will be asked the questions: which staff have you chosen to furlough? Why have you chosen not to furlough staff? Have those answers ready, but absolutely the support and welfare and looking after staff is absolutely part of what we are here to fund through the CBILS scheme. So don't be scared to ask to keep this employment going. And that's really all I had to say today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand on to James Farrell at Strutton Parker.
Thank you, Carl. May you live in interesting times. The so-called Chinese curse, perhaps more appropriate today than at any other time in history. My name is James Farrell, and I have the pleasure and the privilege to lead the Strutton Parker rural team, and I am delighted that we are able to support the CLA in bringing you this series of webinars, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. Now, we've heard about some of the important legal issues that need to be considered at the moment, and there's no doubt that in amongst all of those things there is a huge amount of anxiety and worry, and we began to touch on the areas of well-being, and I want to move the spotlight in that direction over the next few minutes. And I want to tell you a story. And the story starts in 2008, when faced with growing issues around anxiety and drug abuse, depression, suicide, and post-traumatic stress disorder within the American Army. General Casey, who was at the time the head of the American Army, summoned a chap called Martin Seligman to lunch at the Pentagon. Now, some of you may know that Dr. Seligman is the founder of positive psychology. He's the guy that has pushed the science and the development of thinking around positive psychology. And General Casey was aware of his work, which at the time was focused hugely around schools and building resilience within schools, but also within businesses. And he wanted to know how Martin Seligman and his colleagues at the University of Pennsylvania might be able to help the American Army. What General Casey recognized was that he had an amazing combat force. They were fighting fit, but what he could see was that psychologically they were lacking. They were definitely not mentally fit and able to cope with what they were experiencing in Iraq and Afghanistan. And Casey's simple question to Seligman was, what do you think? Can you help us? And Seligman's answer to that was absolutely yes. And he was tasked then with developing this mental fitness to give the soldiers the life skills needed to cope with the adversity that they faced and bounce back stronger from the challenges of combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. And in 2009, the Comprehensive Soldier Fitness Program was launched across the whole of the American Army. More than 1 million people involved in that training program. And so successful was it in its early years that in 2012, it was extended beyond the combat troops themselves to also include their families. Now, its aim was to build resilience and through that to build performance, to build confidence to lead, courage to stand up for one's beliefs, and compassion for others. And when we talk about employment in the context of the current crisis, I can't think of many more appropriate or worthy goals for employers to be pursuing with their employees at the moment. If every employer could be delivering training that met those objectives, I think we would be in a really, really good place. The crisis that we are in will affect everyone in different ways, no question about it. There are huge emotional swings, and I'm sure you're all experiencing them. And there's so much uncertainty that brings with it anxiety, fear, stress. There's deep sadness for some and grief. And with challenges around funeral arrangements, I'm sure there is anger as well. And with all of these negative emotions, there is so little room for hope. And therein, I think, lies not only the challenge, but also the huge opportunity for all employers. And the chance to take something from Seligman's work, which with the American Army has been transformational. He's also worked with governments and many other organizations across the world. But for the American Army, it was so transformational that they moved from a conversation around post-traumatic stress disorder to focusing on post-traumatic growth. The idea that after trauma, you can bounce back and you can grow and really become something beyond what you were before. And this is huge in the American Army now. And I think we can all take something from what Seligman has been up to. To get through this crisis, we all need to be building our mental and emotional skills to strengthen our minds so that we and our employees have the resilience that we need to perform at our best. And Seligman's theory of well-being is built around 5 things, each of which is measurable, each of which we can individually influence. And those 5 things have the helpful mnemonic of PERMA. And they are positive emotion, how we all think and feel. And there are very easy things that we can do to move the dial in the right direction. A lot of people doing Joe Wicks exercise at the moment. There's something for everybody, whatever generation. That's hugely influential. But there are lots of other things. Engagement is the E, being at one with the music. You know how it feels when you're so engrossed in something that time passes without noticing. That's when we're really engaged and we're using our key strengths to complete a task. What are we doing as businesses to ensure that people are using their core strengths and are really engaged? Relationships, massively important. And yet here we all are, self-isolating, locked down, on our own. What impact is that having on people? And what are we doing as employers to ensure that people are not left feeling lonely and alone at this time? There are so many things that we can be doing. And last two are meaning. As human beings, we absolutely crave meaning and purpose in our lives. And that's about being something beyond ourselves, a sense of connection to something bigger than ourselves. And what are we doing in our businesses to create that sense of belonging, both within the business, but also outside, helping people find that sense of something larger than themselves? And A, the last one, accomplishment. We all love that sense of achievement. And again, what are we doing to foster that within our businesses? And for me, I see it as the responsibility of leadership in every business to create the safe space and the environment for these five building blocks to grow and to bring with it the resilience and the human flourishing that every business needs at this extraordinary time. So thank you for listening. And now I will hand over to Stephanie Barclay from the Farm Safety Foundation, who has some more thoughts on the practical things that we can all be doing to help on this side of the mental health agenda. Stay safe.
Okay, hi everybody. Pip, I don't believe my, I don't think my PowerPoint is actually coming up. If everybody, can everybody hear me okay? Yep, okay, so Pip's gonna share my screen with you. So as James said, I'm Steph Barclay and I manage the Farm Safety Foundation. And we are a small charity based in the Midlands that were set up 6 years ago to look after the physical and mental well-being of farmers. Yep, that's me. James, can you unshare your screen? Let me see. All right, okay. So today, if we go on to the next slide, Pip, James talked a lot about the theory of what is happening and why things are happening from a theoretical point of view. But the fact is that the world as we knew it is completely upside down. Remember when you could actually shake somebody's hand? Remember when you could actually go out there and speak to people and not be worried whether or not they're in a Peter Crouch distance away from you, which is apparently the way to measure 2 meters. But what is happening right now has sickened untold numbers of us. It has claimed thousands of lives, and it has shaken everything that we do every single day. So there's a fear that has us conscious of every sniffle and every cough, of the limits of our wonderful NHS, of the underlying conditions that we never thought would actually affect us on a day-to-day basis, and obviously of our home life situation. So we're facing economic stress. I mean, this sounds really overwhelming, and let's be honest, it is. And let's be under no illusion that, you know, our jobs, our hours of working, the prospect of businesses closing is all a very serious concern. But also we have no contact for weeks or months with our friends. Pip, if you can go fast forward for 2 slides, please, if you don't mind. So our emotional and our psychological response is natural and it's human. And that's what we need to be aware of. What we're actually feeling right now is entirely understandable. We may feel anxious about the issue, but our responses can sometimes bring us more suffering. I was going to say that, Mark, the slides aren't changing. So we need to start to build that resilience that James mentioned. and notice our own thoughts, unhook from the unconstructive ones. And do you know what? We can do that. We are actually in control of our thoughts. The skills, oh, that's good. So yeah, don't worry. If we go on to the next one. So there are skills that we can actually nurture and train through practices. And people have said things like mindfulness. What is mindfulness? I'm not going to get into that. It's not about meditation. It's not about anything other than looking at the here and now, looking at present mind thinking, what we can control, what we can't control, what has happened in the past is the past. So we're just going to have to leave that. What we can deal with right now that's going to help us. So there are several ways that we can actually do that. The first way, if we can go on another 2 slides, Pip, if it's at all possible, and I apologize for this, but modern technology, we've just got to deal with it. Connecting with people. And we've said it before, the way we connect with people has changed. The circles of community that we are in at the moment basically have closed. Yeah, stay there, Pip. It's fine. I haven't got to that one yet. Schools are shut. That's an issue. The gyms are shut. That's an issue. We're not able to go out with our friends anymore. These are things that we are having to deal with and find out ways to work around that. There's a sense of isolation that we have and a separation from the people and the groups who understand us, that can give us that support. So we need to make a conscious effort to find a different way to connect to them. That could be through FaceTime, it could be through Zoom quizzes, which we're all probably fed up of at the moment, let's be honest. But picking up the phone and phoning somebody, but actually phoning them through FaceTime rather than the phone is a very important thing. Interestingly enough, yesterday, actually, I had a phone call through FaceTime when I was working, and I hadn't actually realised that, and it's not a person that I normally would have actually face-to-face with, but it was important for them to stay connected to me by doing a FaceTime call. Also gave me a bit of a kick because it meant that I had to change out of my hoodie and actually tie my hair back and put a bit of makeup on, because I would scare people if you saw what I normally look like. So second thing we're talking about is, if you go back, sorry, one, but being active. James mentioned it before, the regular physical activity. We know that this is the case. We do know that the case is that if you have physical activity, you may not want to look forward to it, but once you do it, you feel better. And this is the thing, it might be harder for those over 70. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm getting messages popping up saying that the sound is being lost.
We can hear you perfectly well, Stephanie. You carry on as you are. It's absolutely fine. I can hear you perfectly.
Thank you. Okay, so regular physical activity is associated with lower rates of depression and anxiety. So it's that endorphin kicking off thing. We know that, but we actually can turn around and do something about this in terms of how we actually deal with the anxiety that there is. You know, just because you're not doing something that's particularly intensive doesn't mean it's not going to make you feel better. So the slower paced activities like yoga, like gentle exercise online, and I'm not saying everybody should sign up for Joe Wicks because I know I couldn't do it, but there are people that are competing the London Marathon in their back gardens and stuff, but there are things, small things that you can do to keep yourself active that will help to kick off those endorphins, also help you get you out of one space into another, that will help you be aware and start to take notice of things around you. And that's where I lead on to the next one, which is actually taking notice. And this is the problem as well that we have, is that we are now so aware of what we're trying to do right now. And being aware is what is happening right now in the present can help you make proper decisions about what you can control and what you can't control. Heightened awareness enhances your self-understanding. It allows you to make positive choices. So taking time to enjoy the environment around you. Look out the window. I looked out the window. I've seen squirrels running on the back of the fence. I've never seen them before. We have ducks landing in the garden. Do you know what? They were probably always there, but I never noticed them. So a few tips for doing things like that would be setting aside time and space to focus on the present. I'm not saying get a yoga mat and get a meditation bench, but actually sitting down, calming the mind, closing your eyes, being aware of what you can hear, what you can see, what you can taste for 1 minute in the day will give you 1 minute, and that is actually meditation. But it also helps you to sit there and think of what's going through your mind from a positive point of view, clearing the clutter, and also be kind to yourself, be kind to your thoughts, to your wandering mind. If you think something negative about somebody, don't beat yourself up about it. You may need to get that through your mind to let it go. And this is very, very important as well. And it's important to be aware of the people around you, that it's that we just need to also be aware of time and being aware of people that are around us and be kind to them and be kind to yourself, which is more important. Also keep learning. How many times have you used the excuse, I know I have, that I don't have the time to learn a new skill, I don't have the time to learn a new language. Do you know what? Time is something that we do have. We may not have that hour commute to work or the hour commute back. So I'm getting a message here that says that something's not coming through. Don't know. I'm going to keep talking in case somebody can hear me. Oh, okay, I'm fine. So I have a 16-year-old who wants to learn how to do a skateboard. I have a 19-year-old who wants to learn how to juggle. I have a husband who wants to do an unassisted handstand. I haven't actually set myself a goal yet, but I made a banoffee last week from scratch, which was quite proud of as well. That's the one thing in this time that you could actually control, and it'll give you something else to think about other than COVID. I'm fed up listening to it. You know, so continued learning, we do it at work all the time. We set ourselves goals. We want to learn. Why do we do that in our personal lives? And now, unfortunately, time is something that we have to do. So let's have a look at it. But also setting goals has actually been strongly associated with higher levels of well-being. And give. This is the last one. There are 5 different things, and the last one is give. At the minute, this virus is creating a climate of fear that can create stigmas and judgments about who's to blame for it, who's going to be avoided, as well as those dark survivalist, it's me against the world, every man for himself. We saw it with toilet roll and rice and pasta. That's not healthy. That's not who we are as a nation. At times like this, and I'm going to go back to it, we need to pull together, we need to show compassion, we need to show kindness to each other and to ourselves. I don't know about you, but I really look forward to 8 o'clock on Thursdays for my NHS appreciation applause. I do not like the phrase clap for carers. It's not good. But what I've been doing is actually getting the kids to write thank you notes for bin men, for postmen, going out and seeing neighbours, getting to know them. This is an opportunity that we do have. So what I'm trying to say is we do have resources. There is a book that we have, which is how to cope with the stresses of COVID. Pip will make that available to anybody. It covers everything from mental well-being, from triggers and signs of poor mental health. It helps you to understand the stresses of working from home, how to build resilience in terms of that, how to look out for the people you're living with, you're working with, and that you're working for, how to just stay connected to them, how to get them the support that they need if they need it, and basically how to look out for the signs and symptoms for yourself when your mental health drops, because this is a very severe time. There are people that will care about you. You just need to stay connected to them, make the effort, it's going to be worth it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, very much appreciated. Right, we have about 11 minutes left for Q&A. We've had a number of questions come in. I hope everybody can see me. So what we will do is I'll pick up some of the questions. And if all the speakers could please turn their cameras back on but keep themselves on mute. What we'll do, we'll go through some of these questions, and I think the first couple, in fact, I will direct at Matthew, if that's okay. Matthew, the first one was, if a staff member takes a second job, how many hours are they able or are they allowed to work, and are they getting paid twice?
Well, my understanding is that you can take a second job if you've been furloughed and there's no problem with your current employer's contract saying that you can work for another employer, that you can then, say, take a job fruit picking or working in the local supermarket. And I don't think there is any limit on how many hours you take on. So yeah, potentially you can get some extra money. You do have to be ready to come back to work when called by your employer, but that will be at least after a 3-week break for furlough.
And while you're on, before you mute yourself, another one. You mentioned about an employer requiring staff to take annual leave during the furlough period. What's the required notice that an employer has to give them to require them to do this?
Yes, I mean it's effectively reasonable notice, but normally if you were going to ask someone to take a day's holiday, you'd need to give them at least 2 days prior notice. A week, I'd give them over 2 weeks notice of that, if that makes sense.
It does, thank you very much. Okay, another question. As the job retention scheme has been extended, is it necessary to confirm furlough extensions in writing to each employee? So if you're continuing to furlough them on, do you need to then confirm that in writing? And are you able to do that without further consultation with them? Either Matthew or Roberta, I guess, would be best for that one.
Shall I carry on?
Yeah, carry on, I think.
Yeah, I think it would be a question of keeping your employees up to date, and I would let them know that they're continuing to be furloughed. I think it's the same situation where you don't necessarily have to get a written response back from them, but I would update them on the position.
Wonderful, thank you. We've had a few questions about well, first of all, James, your 5 points. I've had a number of people asking for your 5 points on a slide. So if you have that available, I think that would be very much appreciated by people. There were a lot of people quite taken with that. One quickly for Carl, and it isn't necessarily particularly about employment necessarily, but about bounce back loans. And I imagine this is going to affect a lot of people in terms of when they can bring back employees. So perhaps is indirectly still relevant to employment. But how quickly can the new bounce back loans be delivered? As they are much needed and hopefully simpler than the earlier loan scheme.
Yeah, so we are building the bounce back loan scheme at Barclays as we speak, and we hope to open them for applications on Monday, and we are building in as much automation as we physically can. We want these to be available quickly and easily for us and for the client. So watch our website, but we anticipate going live on Monday.
Another one just come in. Are we required to pay full salary for specific days such as Easter and the 2 May bank holidays? Matthew, I guess that's probably one for you again. I think you're going to get the brunt of these, I'm afraid, Matthew.
No, that's fine. So the answer to that is that you do have to top up. If one employee normally is able to take and be paid for bank holidays, then you do have to top up their salary to their usual pay for the bank holidays. Unfortunately, that's the guidance, and that's what it says.
Thank you. One I'll direct to you, Stephanie. It's a bit of a sad one, but question asked about: do we know how many suicides there have been in the rural community since October 2019, which have been driven by added financial pressures and significant losses brought about by the adverse winter weather and now coronavirus? I think the statistic is 1 person in farming a week dies due to suicide, and obviously the added pressures of this may well be adding to that. So Stephanie, do you have some statistics on that? Stephanie, you're still on mute. Sorry, start again from the beginning. You're still on mute.
Sorry. So yeah, having dealt with a lot of their rural charities at the moment, I can actually give some relatively positive news on that front, because there have not been a significant uplift in calls to rural charities as a result of this particular incident. Reason being is that farmers are used to working in isolation. They're used to social distancing. So I would think, and it's not now, but I would say 3 months from now, we will see a significant lift in the number of farmers accessing rural support groups and rural charities for that type of support. The last official Office of National Statistics figure was that 83 workers in agricultural related trades died by suicide, and that was in 2018. That is the most accurate, up-to-date information that we have. Now, please bear in mind, Office of National Statistics deal with farmers up to the age of 65. And how many farmers do you know retire at 65? So they are not particularly representative, and I don't think it's a particularly robust figure. However, levels of depression in the industry are said to be growing. Though the amount of rural charities that are gaining visibility and actually pushing themselves out there has increased over the last couple of years as a result of the issues that are, and as you said, whether or not it's market fluctuations, whether it's weather, adverse weather conditions, all of those other external factors and stressors that the industry's faced that are completely out of their control, they are contributing to those levels of depression in the industry. But on a more green shoot side of things, and I don't want to say positive because it's not positive, any of it, but there have not been any significant uplift in calls to rural charities at the moment as a result of COVID.
Thank you for that one. Another question: if a business is currently topping up to 100% for furloughed workers, and then they find that as time goes on they can no longer afford to continue that top up and need to revert to the job retention scheme standard of 80%, what is the process for doing that? Or is there a particular process that businesses need to follow? I guess that's another one for you again, Matthew.
I was going to try and pass that to Roberta. So they've agreed to originally top up, and now they need to change to back to the 80%.
Correct.
I think it's again, it's difficult times. I mean, I think people will probably still be happier with 80% than potentially losing their jobs. It again really is a question of trying to get agreement on that, but I would have thought people will agree to that because that does keep them in a role. Question of notifying and ideally getting them to write back to confirm they agree that. But yeah, it shouldn't be something that I would have thought too many would object to.
Wonderful, thank you, Matthew. Another one, a little bit more about loans and things. Sorry, Carl, again, not necessarily directly related to, but you mentioned, I think, on the last webinar about relationship managers being given financial authority for capital repayment holidays. Are you able to just sort of confirm that they have had that, and how long customers could be expecting to wait when seeking those capital repayment holidays on loans?
Yeah, certainly from a Barclays perspective, as I said last time, for well-run businesses that have no problems in the past, our managers have the authority to get those in place, and they're happening within 2 to 3 days of those requests going in. If you've not had a request, it may be sat in a backlog somewhere, and I would encourage anybody just to pick back up to the relationship manager and just ask where it's at. But certainly we've got that authority, and for well-run businesses, there shouldn't be a major issue. For those that have got more difficult issues and maybe historic losses, then that will have to go to an underwriter for approval, and that is taking a little bit longer. But communicate with your relationship manager directly, frequently.
Wonderful, thank you. We've got about a minute left, I think, so I think we've got time for one more question. And I've got one here. How would you address a situation where all but one staff member accepts the option to be furloughed? Would we have to look at redundancy process for that individual? And obviously in this particular instance, it says, and perhaps that individual has an eye on potential redundancy payment due to their age and length of service. So yeah, how do we address a situation where all but one member of staff accepts the option to be furloughed? Roberta, would you like to talk about that one?
Yes. I think you're going to have to see what agreement you can reach with the employee, because, as I said, it's very difficult if the employee doesn't agree to be furloughed, because the employee, you can't impose it on the employee. So it may very well be an indication that this is the length of, this is the time to think about the employee's continued and future employment with you. Insofar as the employee is obviously not a very happy person. So it may be that redundancy would be the best solution for you for that person.
Thank you, Roberta. Well, I'm afraid we are up for time. So apologies if we haven't got around to your question, but we will be making note of all the questions, and we'll try and get back to you on those. So some very interesting questions have been asked today. And I'd just like to extend my thanks before we close. I'd like to extend my thanks to all the speakers and to our partners for today's event. I'd also like to draw your attention to the upcoming webinars that CLA are running. There is one this Friday, an audience with Mark Southern, a National Head of Agriculture at Barclays. That's Friday the 1st of May at 3 p.m. And then next Wednesday, we have our regular Wednesday webinar at 11 a.m. on the future of farming, where we will be in 2050. And I shall be watching with keen anticipation for that one. So thank you to everybody who's attended. Thank you to our speakers, and thank you to all those who have logged on to hear people speak and to ask questions. And I wish you all the very best. So thank you and goodbye. Oh.